Okay. Vitruvius, in the first chapter of the second book of the Architettura, tells how fire constituted, even before language, the first form of aggregation of primitive man. To protect himself, he first dug caves, then built shelters imitating the structures of birds' nests, and finally built huts with tree trunks. Over time, the myth of the origins, as represented from Abbot Loger to Gottfried Semper, up to the masters of the modern movement, a central theme in the evolution of the architectural theories of 19th and 20th, based on the difference between stereotomy and tectonics, or between the Roman idea and the Greek idea of building. In the primitive hut described in his famous Essai sur l'architecture, Loger identifies an ideal model referable to the tectonics of Greek architecture that becomes the rational foundation for the renewal of the architecture in the Age of Enlightenment. A century later, Semper identifies the characteristics of primitive hut in the Caribbean hut and defines the nature of the different construction elements. The stone stereotomy of the base, the wooden tectonics of the roof frame, the textile character of the cladding, and the heart of the functional core of living. If Loger and Semper refer to the tectonic and material aspects of the original house, Fustel de Coulanges notes that the foundation of the house of the ancient originates from a precise symbolic act, the enclosure of the altar of the gods of the family, which refers to the Roman cult of the Lares and Penetes inside the house. In the stereotomic space of the domus, any direct relationship with the landscape and with the city is intentionally denied, and the relationship with the elements of nature becomes abstract. The compluvium projects a square of light inside the atrium, changing over the hours and seasons. Thus takes shape a representation of a cyclical time that daily marks the rites and rhythms of family life. In this way, around the void defined by the impluvium and compluvium, the bond of the domestic space of the earth and the sky is substantiated, sojourn of mortal on earth under the sky before the divine, of which Martin Heidegger speaks in his famous essay of 1951. This symbolic relationship between space and time, as Francesco Venezia notes, is then transferred and dilated by the simple human cube of the atrium to the divine limits of the Pantheon sphere. The original stereotomic and tectonic form of living have constituted for many of the masters of the modern movement a fertile field of experimentation, starting precisely from the spatial archetype of the domus and the principle of the structure of the primitive hut. Le Corbusier imagines two residential prototypes that can be replicated and combined in series. The Maison Domino, a frame structure that allows a free arrangement of the floor plan and the fronts, and the Maison Citroën, defined from walls and characterized by a double height space. It is evident that Domino constitutes a reinterpretation of the tectonic system of the primitive hut, theorized by Le Corbusier in 5 points for a new architecture, of which Villa Seurat is the manifesto. The layout of Maison Citroën refers to the space of the domus that Le Corbusier also experiences in the double height of the living room and the loggia of the Esprit Nouveau pavilion. This research on the value of the void as a compositional nucleus of the domestic space is a legacy of the youthful suggestion of the Voyage d'Orient. In 1911, Le Corbusier visited Pompeii. Two domus in particular attracted his attention. The House of Silver Wedding, which impresses him with the height of vestibule and the special sequence that leads to the garden, and the House of the Tragic Poet, of which he guessed the refined axial construction of the plant. The interest in original forms of living characterizes the research of other masters of 20th century, Mies van der Rohe among them. The design of three-court house reaches an absolute degree of formal abstraction, as Antonio Monestiroli states, contains all the historical depth of the house, even if primary elements such as doors and windows are omitted in this project. There remains a roof and a fence, yet in this house you can recognize the whole house. The later Farnsworth house is a reinterpretation of the Semperian hut. The 4 elements of the architecture, however, are declined in abstract form. The base becomes a podium raised from the ground. The white frame retards an immaterial image in which the pillar now denote the tectonic function of supporting. The transparency of the envelope then cancels any solution of continuity between the architectural space and the nature, defining a timeless place. The only symbolic element that refers to the function of living is the heart of the fireplace. Mies investigates the reason for living through some foundational actions: enclosing, covering, lifting, or connecting, as in the case of the project for Razor House, a house in form of a bridge, in which the domestic space becomes a representation of the surrounding nature, so revealing the intention of the place in the Heideggerian meaning. The place does not already exist before the bridge. The bridge is a place, it grants the space in which earth and sky, mortal and divine, as have access. The wide diffusion of Kenneth Frampton's test studies in tectonic culture, the poetics of construction in 19th and 20th, confirms the interest of contemporary architectural culture for stereotomy and tectonics, and for the Vitruvian archetypes of cave and the hut, an interest also declared by one of the most attentive architects of our time. By stereotomic architecture, writes Alberto Campobaez, we mean the one in which gravity is transmitted continuously. It is massive, stony, heavy architecture. It is an architecture that seeks light, that pierces the walls to ensure that light enters it. It is the architecture of the podium, of the base, that of the stylobate. It is, in summary, the architecture of the cave. By tectonic architecture, we mean that in which gravity is transmitted discontinuously in a structural system where the construction is syncopated. It is bony, woody, light architecture. It is the architecture of the envelope. In summary, it is the architecture of the hut. What appears evident is how these original forms have constituted a fundamental tool for the renewal of the domestic space of the 20th century, as if modernity could only be implemented through a return to the ontological condition of living. In architecture, the myth of the origin refers to the idea of a cyclical time, of an eternal present in which, in the words of Alvar Aalto, what is past never returns, but it doesn't completely disappear. What was always reappears, but in new forms. Perhaps one of the reasons for the impoverishment of our age lies in the fact that the interest of architecture is concentrated beyond any constructive reason on the shapes of the shell and the envelope that no longer denotes a solution of continuity between interior and external, but appears as a surface, as a screen, as an image devoid of any tectonic foundation. Thank you very much.